Hello, my name is Chris Studebaker. I'm the CEO of the Realtor Association of the Fox Valley. We will be discussing the new multi-board residential real estate contract 8.0. In this video, we will explore the layout of the document and highlight the nuances of each paragraph or section to ensure you feel confident utilizing it in your daily work. In addition, please make sure you view the video that reviews the major changes between the 7.0 and 8.0 contracts. This walkthrough aims to make every section clear and actionable, enabling you to provide exceptional service to your clients. The members of our Contracts and Forms Task Force, Patty Bessler, Carrie Gostecki, Nina Cerna, Rick Williams, and Paul Kempa will present this information. I'd like to now turn it over to Rick Williams.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Williams, designated managing broker of United Real Estate Chicago, and I'll be walking you through the first half of the contract today. Let's get started. Okay, on page one, parties to the contract, page one, paragraph one, okay, which is basically lines 1, 2, 3, and 4. Buyer's name, make sure you've got the buyer's name in there. You are writing the contract as the buyer agent, put that in there. You should also be writing in the seller's name. That you can attain, simply by clicking on Realist or anywhere else to check out the disclosures. It all has the seller's name. Put that in there. Please print, put it in. Line 4, dual agency applies, click it here. Very important that you click that box. It will carry over into an additional portion of dual agency, but it is important, if in fact you are doing that you do check that box. Okay. Next we get into, and this is not a change from previous, but property details in section 2 here, real estate, page 1, paragraph 2. Include your property address, of course, and very important is that you do, like on line 7 there, with lot size or acreage of. Per survey is not appropriate. You need to put in what the expectations are of this lot. Look it up, do what you got to do. Even if the listing said per survey, you need to do a little bit more there because people need to know what they're getting, okay? If it's 3 acres, they want to know that they're getting 3 acres. That's the anticipated acreage. And then, of course, your address on line 8, put that in specifically. The PIN number, permanent index number on line 10. And then on line 11, slight change there, just the way they did it. They got a single family attached, single family detached, or multi-unit. Check whichever one is appropriate on that. Okay, so that's the property details. Next lines there you have your starting on line 16, paragraph 3. You're talking about purchase price, and your payment, and this is your offer price, for your client. So you put in your purchase price, and then this carries on, and what they've done to page 1 now is everything is on page 1 in relation to, which is fantastic, to any kind of the monetary stuff, and all the important aspects are all on page 1. So, they're talking about, once again, the purchase price on line 16, and they talk about that it's going to be paid at closing with good funds, as they put in there. And then line 19 through 21 talks about if you are doing any type of credit per closing. Okay, so this is right on page 1, line 19. If that's what you're asking for, your buyer is asking for, this is where you put it. Okay, then we get into the earnest money. You have, once again, not a real change here, but just placement is just a little bit of the change. Okay, so you put how much earnest money you're putting in there, and when it'll be tendered by, same as always before, whether that's 2 days, 3 days, whatever you're talking about with your buyer. And then very important, line 25 needs to be checked. One of these boxes, seller's brokerage, buyer's brokerage, or as otherwise agreed upon between the parties. Okay, you check what you're doing. You're writing the contract. That could be altered at some point, but remember, always fill these in. Okay. Then you've got, review the earnest. It also talks about, if there's any additional earnest money that's going to be in there. A lot of people put in X amount of dollars after AI, whatever you're going to do there. That's all, once again, all the way 21 through 24. And then the brokerage or wherever you're going to be holding that earnest money. Okay, talks about balance due at closing. And then on line 30, They start talking about right up front here if the home warranty applies. Okay, so this is once again, this used to be way back somewhere. Now it's on page 1, mainly because there's dollar amount in there. So anything that has to do with dollars being procured or anywhere else, it's all talked about on page 1, which is really great. The new change about the 8.0. So on line 31, they talk about seller contribution. Okay, this is what we always were putting in these addendums on the 7.0. This is everything that we are now addressing with compensation. Okay, so now we have it right on page 1. Okay, so you've got line 33. If you're initialing line 33, you're agreeing, seller agrees to pay the buyer brokerage, and then it's a percent, whatever that percent is, okay, of purchase price. It's always of purchase price, okay? The next blank talks about a dollar amount. If you have just a prescribed dollar amount, $2,000, $5,000, whatever that number is. The other is percent, which is seemingly more typical in most transactions. And then the next is about a dollar amount, okay? And then line 35 talks about if there is nothing, the seller is not paying anything to the buyer brokerage, then you would initial that line. Okay, so you'd be initialing 33 if you're asking for it from the seller, and you'd be initialing line 35 if your buyer is paying you as the buyer broker to your brokerage. Okay, so that's the distinction there. Right on page 1, very simple, no more addendums required, right there for you. Okay, making it simple. If you're going to do any kind of minus fee, you're not going to do that on the buy end, but they may do it on the sell end. May come from there, but obviously you're not filling that out. Very simple, done. Okay, closing. The closing, which is line 36, paragraph 5, this will be no changes. When is the closing? Once again, not on page 2 now, right on page 1. It's great. So all your salient facts are all right here for you. Okay, you simply put when the closing will be, and then you get to talk about possession in paragraph 6 there. And once again, not a change, just a location change. And then they talk about fixtures and personal property at no added value. So essentially, that's page 1. Okay, so all your salient facts, once again, right there on page 1. Fill out all the blanks. If they don't apply, make sure you put an NA or a dash, something through. Please, and one of the most important things, and to make you look professional, fill out the blanks. And especially seller name. Seller name is not nobody, a blank. There is a seller, okay? Fill it out. You look much more professional if you do, okay? Same thing on the bottom, address, the initials. So now that we're talking about paragraph 7, they're talking about all the items the checkbox items. If you fill out the contract in the MLS, a lot of these things will carry forward. Just like the 7.0 did. They will, if the oven's there, the check boxes, they'll be there, but always check the check boxes. Make sure that even though they said it on the listing, it didn't, in the listing sheet, make sure it's in there and everything that you want. There are a lot of new changes on this, additional items, but whatever items your buyer wants at the time of the presentation of this offer, that's what it states on line 45, is exactly what you should ask for, okay? Whatever your expectation is, and they should be in working order unless otherwise talked about for whatever reason. As you can see, a lot more detail there in amount of items that are in there. That'll be talked about, in another section. And line 61, they talk about alternative energy, solar and whatnot. You check the box there if this is something that's applicable to this particular home. And then there's an additional paragraph 34 that's talk about it, says it right there. That's where but you need to check that box right there if that applies. Okay. Other items included at no additional value, line 62. The most important thing there, like similar to 7.0, when in doubt, spell it out. If you're really anticipating, getting that magnificent fixture in the dining room, spell it out. If that's what your buyer really wants, of course, it's supposed to be there when you close, but it doesn't, never hurts to put it in there. When in doubt, spell it out. Okay? So then they warrant to all the other fixtures, same stuff in 65, 66, no changes there. Okay? Now we get into financing. Okay? The financing contingencies. Paragraph 8. Okay? So in line 70, okay, it says, that this is, not for, it used to say loan contingency. Now it says financing contingency. Really the only change there, not a big deal, saying the same thing. You've got your same blanks there. They talk about fixed, adjustable, FHA, VA, USDA, other, whatever, okay? And the loan for what percent. Once again, very important to fill this stuff out. You can't just blow it off and fill it in later. That's not applicable. Not a good contract, not what you should be doing as a professional, okay? Line 80, kind of important here, obtaining secondary financing or grants, as follows. So if that's what they're doing, if your client is doing that, you should reference that right there. That's a little different, and talk about that program, whatever it is, and then that's where that blank is. Okay, and then in line 83, they talk about not later than financing contingency dates and things like that. And, a couple of changes are in there. That'll be discussed later. But that's the financing options and the financing approval options, which is on the end of page 2 there. Okay, moving on to page 3, okay, we start talking about insurance. Okay, and the insurance contingencies. Okay, in paragraph 9, they start talking about this. Everything above that is the same as the old form. So you got your cash transaction, so no issues there. But when you're talking about insurance, this is a big deal here because of what's happening in California and Florida. All our insurance has gone up in value, which can affect the loan. And people have been finding out at closings, they can no longer afford the property. This is not the time to find that out. Okay. So what's highly recommended these days is the day that this contract is accepted, you call your insurance right away. You instruct your buyer, call the insurance. Okay. They've got to get what they call a clue report. And that gives you everything that's ever happened to this property and the quote. Okay. Once again, these quotes that used to be $1,100, $1,200, they're now double that oftentimes, okay? Which takes the buyer right out of the equation. He or she can't afford the property. Very important, day one, get your homeowner's insurance quote. Make sure your buyers are doing that, okay? That is a huge change to what's going on. Not what's in here, but that's what's going on in the industry, okay? Flood insurance, okay? So, flood insurance is the same kind of blank. It's paragraph 10 in here. If you're in a special flood insurance area, once again, this would probably be drawn out in that insurance. When you go for your homeowner's insurance, they would probably tell you that if in fact it wasn't listed on the listing sheet or you didn't look it up. Remember, you could look all this stuff up yourself as well. It's not a difficult process to do that right on, with what we have, in Realist and some of these other things. It's right in the MLS for you. Okay, so that's flood insurance. Okay, so when we go into page 4 and they start talking about disclosures, well, the bottom of page 3 actually, and then on to page 4, nothing's changed there about the disclosures. I would say, 85% of the people do put the disclosures in the MLS, okay? So you can receive those disclosures simply by going into, on the MLS and the attachments, they're there, okay? Pull them up. Once again, that'll give you the lead in to put who the seller is because it says it right on the disclosures. So once you pull that up, you have that. Do the same thing you've always done. Has or has not received any of those, the EPA pamphlet, protecting your family, all those things. Do what we've always done. Okay. Okay. When we're talking about make sure that they're all, that is very important. Your lead-based paint, your radon, the property disclosure, these are all mandatory in the state of Illinois. Nothing's changed, with that. Make sure that you check the appropriate boxes there. When you get into prorations, okay, same thing here. This is paragraph 12, okay? So, talk about everything here, closing on, fill it in. Don't leave it blank. The attorneys may change it, but once again, no blanks. That is not an appropriate contract when you are missing blanks. You look extremely professional when all blanks are filled out. You don't when you're missing things, okay? So the proration shall not include exemptions in which the seller is not lawfully entitled, same as before. But on 154B, in the event of real estate is improved but not previously taxed for the entire year, as currently approved, the sum of 3% of the purchase price shall be deposited in the escrow with the title. A little bit of a change, here, just something to note, okay? And then the rest of it, if there's a master umbrella, this is where you fill all that stuff in. It should be right on the MLS listing sheet, and you should have been doing your due diligence as the buyer agent to make sure. You should have called the HOA to ensure that that's the cost, that's what he's paying, that there are no raises in the assessments coming up shortly, and those kind of things. That's part of what you should be doing as a buyer agent, okay? Now, we get into the attorney review portion, which is paragraph 13, okay? There it says it's the same 5 business days. Nothing has really changed there. One thing that's, is a little, somewhat different in there. If after expiration of the 10 business days, after acceptance, the written agreement has not been reached by the parties with respect to resolution, of all the proposed modifications, either party may terminate the contract. Okay, that's in there before, but just make sure you're aware of these type of lines. And sometimes these days, some of these insurance things and the HOAs, they're taking 10 days to do some of these things. Like to get an insurance quote is not always within the 5 business days. Okay, so be very cognizant of some of the changes that are happening in the industry due to, climates throughout the country. A lot of things are changing, simply because they are, not because, it's because the world is changing. So you got to be very aware of these things. All right, so that concludes page 4. Okay, now we'll get into, bottom of page 4, top of page 5, paragraph 14, which is, talking about as is condition. Okay, and here's where we're just gonna, there's large changes here, but I'm just gonna start. If you check the box or initial the box in 188, what this is doing, this is saying that this truly is as is, and you are not going to do any inspections. You're not entitled to do any inspections, okay? You are basically accepting it as is. That's what 14 is, okay? So this is potentially something you want to do if you really want that property. Do I think it's one of the greatest ideas you can ever do without inspections or anything like that? Probably not. So right here is where we're going to have Carrie. She's going to walk you through the rest of the inspection section, which starts with paragraph 15 and all the different types of inspections.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Garstecki. I'm the managing broker of Keller Williams Inspire. I will be walking you through the remaining portion of the contract, starting at page 5, paragraph 15, the inspections. Our inspection paragraph has 3 parts to it, and your buyers and sellers will sign either subparagraph A, where you are waiving inspections. This means the buyer is giving up their right to bring anyone in to inspect the property. Subparagraph B is that you are conducting the inspections and you have the option to make requests for repairs or remediation of issues that should arise. Subparagraph C is that you are going to do an inspection and you are not going to make repair requests. That inspection is for the buyer's information only. It is not a time to renegotiate the contract. If that buyer is doing an as-is, subparagraph A or subparagraph C should be that choice that they are initialing. And again, they have 5 business days to conduct the inspection and make any request if they are allowed to make request at that time. As we move on to paragraph 16, you will notice that it clearly states that paragraph 16 are additional inspections that are not subject to the paragraph 14 and 15, which is the as-is paragraph and the inspections. Paragraph A, again, is the wood destroying insect inspection. This paragraph talks about the seller paying for that wood destroying infestation, is typically seen with VA loans. Paragraph B is the well or sanitary system inspection. This talks about the seller providing reports of inspection of these items. If they exist, this paragraph should be initialed for the seller to provide those reports. As we move on down the contract is the condominium and common interest properties. Many properties either belong to some type of common interest, commonly called an HOA. Single-family homes and attached homes can both be a member of an HOA. This paragraph talks about what is required of the seller to provide those HOA rules, regulations to the buyer and what time frame that is. Those HOA documents, once the buyer receives them, they should be received within 10 days of the acceptance of the contract, and that buyer has 5 days. And again, we're talking about business days on both of those numbers to go ahead and either agree to, or if there is some rule that that buyer cannot abide by and is not good for them, they can say we are canceling the contract based on the HOA rules. Now notice they have 10 days to get you the rules. Inspection and attorney is 5 days. This is another kind of contingency exception there that those rules kind of could extend to. Moving on, paragraph 18 talks about the deed. It is the seller's responsibility to provide a deed, clear and free, no boundaries on that deed. Same thing with paragraph 20, that title. The title should ensure there is nothing there that the new buyer cannot use the property for. If there are any encroachments or things like that, title policy should cover those. Paragraph 21 talks about the survey. The PLATA survey, which is page 8, we're on now. PLATA survey. This paragraph says the seller should provide a PLATA survey not later than 1 business day prior to closing. So the buyer should receive that from the seller no later than the day before closing. On page 8 as well, we have damage or condemnation to the property. Paragraph 22 describes what the buyer's options are if the property is damaged or condemned before closing. The buyer does have that option to get out of the contract if it is damaged. 8 and 9, paragraph 24 talks about the seller representations regarding notifications and knowledge of any defects in the property. Many of these items are on the real property disclosure, but the seller again is stating at the time of contract that they are unaware of any of these items existing. So it goes through your zoning, your boundary line disputes, but it also talks about improvements to the home that did not have a permit. So again, it's asking questions of the seller on what they know about the property. And they are re-verifying there many of the items that are on the real property disclosure. At the top of page 9, paragraph 25 just talks about what is a business day and hour. Obviously, buyers move across the country, and we need to identify which time zone and what are considered business hours. So 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Chicago time is the time frame that we consider a business day. Also on page 9, paragraph 26 talks about electronic signatures or digital signatures. Once upon a time, we know that everything had to be signed in ink and the same contract went everywhere. Now we have the ability to sign electronically using digital signatures with various platforms that are available to the market. At the bottom of page 9, paragraph 27 talks about direction to escrowee. The direction to the escrowee is whoever is holding that escrow money in the contract, aka your earnest money. What rules does that escrowee follow? This makes it clear to both the buyer and the seller that that escrow money is not being returned unless there is written agreement by both parties. Page 9 again, paragraph 28 is notice. The notice requirement on the page, paragraph 28, talks about what is the notice you have to give and the ways you can provide that notice via electronic, email, mail, postal service, commercial, overnight, FedEx. On page 10, the next paragraph is performance. Performance is of the essence. Everyone should be acting in a timely manner and making sure the deadlines in the contracts are met. Remember, if someone is not acting timely and they're causing delay and those deadlines are missed because of them, they do not have the right to cancel the contract. Also on page 10, we have confirmation of dual agency is paragraph 30. Your buyer and seller will have already confirmed it on the listing agreement and the buyer agency. The purchase contract is another place, the second out of 3, where they both agree that this agent has permission to be a dual agent. Paragraph 30 on page 10 talks about dual agency. This is the confirmation from both the buyer and the seller that they are still in agreement to allow the agent to be a dual agent. The seller and the buyer have already given permission on their initial agency documents and now again giving confirmation that they have given that dual agency permission. Further down on page 10 in paragraph 31 is the sale of buyer's real estate. The buyer must sell their real estate that they currently live in or own in order to buy the next property. Many times this comes up the buyer must take the equity out of the existing property to buy a new one. When that happens, they need to fill out paragraph 31. You must disclose whether or not what the property address is. Is it under contract already? Is it listed? Make sure that if you are checking those boxes in subparagraph 2, where it says buyer has or has not entered into a contract, that is about the property that they currently have. And then A, B, and C under that pertains to their buyer's contract. If they have not entered into a contract, A, B, and C are not going to be applicable. Those are going to be only if a contract has been entered into. Paragraph 3 in the sale of buyer's real estate talks about if the property is not already under contract, has it been or has not been publicly listed? So is that property going to be publicly listed, say, on our MLS? And if it isn't publicly listed yet, what this also says in paragraph 4 is that it needs to be publicly listed in a local multiple listing service within 5 business days. And then it also asks which brokerage and their address will that property be listed under. Remember, sometimes they're moving from out of the area and it's going to be an agent out of the area and not you, their buyer's agent, listing that property. Subparagraph B under the sale of buyer's real estate talks about the contingencies on closing. Subparagraph A, which we just talked about, was all about making sure that property is sold. If it's not under contract yet, it's a contingency to sell. Paragraph B would be the rest of the information. If that property is already under contract and we just need it to close, what information do we need? The really important information is line 447. That paragraph talks about the date on which that property, the buyer's current home, is needing to be in a full force contract, executed, fully effective contract. Make sure you are looking at what the market is and knowing a date that is not going to be at risk for the property and have your client lose out on this one, because it needs to have a full effective contract date on that. On page 11, this paragraph continues. It is our real estate closing date. So it says, this is the date that it's contingent on closing the home. So if the buyer has not closed the sale of real estate on this date, the seller has the right to cancel the contract. So I usually recommend putting in at least the same date of closing on both the one contract I'm writing and the closing date on the other home. Well, subparagraph C, the seller's right to continue offer real estate for sale. This paragraph talks about the fact that the seller is still going to be able to show this property. It is not totally off the market yet. That is why on some third-party sites, you all see that it's still showing active, because it's still considered not a fully concrete sale. There is a kick-out clause. That kick-out clause is on line 471. That blank there says, how many hours does your buyer require in order for it to be kicked out? So if another bona fide offer comes in, how many hours will your buyer be given before they get kicked out of the contract if they cannot remove the contingency? All right. As we move down, subparagraph D, it's the waiver of paragraph 31 contingencies. This is if the seller gets another bona fide offer and they come back to this buyer and ask, can you remove your contingency, whether it's house to sell, house to close? If that buyer is able and willing to remove that contingency, paragraph D, that starts on 491, will be implemented. And they're going to ask for additional earnest money to secure that contract. We are seeing the final paragraph on that, the final subparagraph on paragraph 31, the buyer cooperation required. This reminds the buyer that the seller has the right to have the evidence about their home. That means their buyer contract is going to be shared with the seller that they are buying from. We now start paragraph 32, cancellation of prior real estate. Before, in the 7.0, this was a very short paragraph. It now has elaborated and it has 3 subparagraphs. You are going to make sure that you initial the paragraph that applies. Paragraph A is if the seller has entered into a prior real estate contract, that the seller is going to cancel that contract before the date on line 501. That is if it is a contingent contract. So you are bumping out that house to close contingency. That would be paragraph A. Paragraph B is the event that the sellers entered into a real estate contract that is not contingent on a prior sale or closing. Maybe you are coming in during those first 5 days when it's attorney inspection. Subparagraph C is if the buyer has entered into a prior real estate contract and they need to show cancellation of that previous contract and put the date that needs to be terminated on. Again, if any of those cancellations are not met by the date, this contract you are writing is null and void. Paragraph 33 is the home warranty policy. If the buyer is offering a home warranty or that buyer is asking for one if the seller is not offering one up, that paragraph will be filled out. As a buyer's agent, you should be very specific and put in the cost of the home warranty that your buyer is looking for. You can go on to those websites and look at the pricing. They are all over the board. Make sure you want it what that buyer is covering. Paragraph 34 talks about alternative energy. This is a new paragraph that was added in because the popularity of solar panels and the issues that may have arisen out of homes with solar panels. We need to know about the solar panels and whether or not they are owned. Are they paid in full? Are they rented? There is also the option for future use of alternative energies that could come about with the other. So if there are solar panels on the home, you are going to initial check the box marked solar panels, and then either line 518, 519, 520, and 521 will need to be filled out based on whether or not there's a financial obligation that will be transferring to the buyer. Paragraph 35, possession after closing. If the seller will not be able to vacate the home at closing, and the buyer taking possession, they can negotiate that at the time of writing the contract. When that happens, you can put that in there, and you can choose a certain number of dates or a specific calendar date, which will be the possession date. You will then put in a rental amount. Remember that in a legal document, if you are using to be determined, it's not enforceable because it still needs to be agreed upon. That contract will not be fully effective. We need to have a specific number in there. If it is left blank on 531, it will be 2%. That money of escrow is put aside for the rent. 533 should be that specific number. There's not an option there to leave it blank. Paragraph 36 is specified party approval. Specified party approval talks about if there's anyone else besides the buyer who may need to approve this contract. Paragraph 37 talks about contract addendums. We have some contract addendums that are pretty common, such as a short sale addendum. That would need to be given notice. A reverse contingency addendum is one of the new addendums that go with the multi-board 8.0 contract. If that one's used, you need to check that. An appraisal addendum or a multi-unit 4 or fewer living units. Those addendums, you could check more than one if they apply. Gives you the option to write in another addendum if that is going to apply to this contract. Paragraph 38 is miscellaneous provisions. These are those special sale items or special types of sale. So articles of agreement for deed or purchase money, assumption of the seller's mortgage, a co-op apartment, tax deferred exchange, new construction, vacant land, lease to purchase. All of those are a special type of sale and would have an addendum defining the terms. If those apply, one of those boxes should be checked. On page 14, is everybody's contact information. We have the date of the offer, the date of acceptance. Please make sure those are completed. Whether you are on the buyer side or the seller side, that should be completed because once that contract is accepted is when those clocks on business days and timing issues begin. Buyer signatures, seller signatures are on here. Their names should be legible and printed. Again, remember, legal documents are going to be filled out and completed, and this is part of where they're getting their information. The buyer's broker information and seller's broker information should be completed. All of that is available to you in the MLS. Buyer's attorneys, seller's attorneys, if you know that information at the time, please fill that in. Same thing with mortgage company and HOA. That way everyone knows who is who in the transaction. On behalf of RAFV, thank you for joining us on this detailed walkthrough of the Multi-Board Residential Real Estate Contract 8.0. This updated contract is more than just a legal document. It is a tool designed to improve transparency, foster collaboration, and streamline transactions in today's dynamic real estate market. We encourage you to leverage the training materials and resources provided by our association to deepen your understanding and mastery of this document. By doing so, you ensure that you remain a trusted and knowledgeable partner for your clients. Your commitment to excellence and adaptability sets you apart in this industry. Thank you for your time, and here's to your continued success in navigating the complexities of modern real estate transactions.